All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us for Kerby Center's first presentation in our month-long series of presentations on infectious disease, immunization, and staying healthy in body and mind, powered by Sanofi Pasteur. As we gather here today, it's vital we remember the peoples who've gathered here for millennia. This is the Treaty 7 land of the Indigenous peoples of southern Alberta, the Blackfoot nations of Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda nations of Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wellesley, and the historic home of the Northwest Métis and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. It's with a goal of reconciliation that we acknowledge the land on which we gather, and we thank the elders of these nations for their timeless contributions to this land. We know that in the last 9 months has been a particularly difficult time for our seniors, and many of you have very genuine concerns about how to lower your risk and to maintain good health in the midst of pandemic and upcoming flu season. Over the next few weeks, with the support of Sanofi Pasteur and several renowned medical professionals, we will hope to answer some of these questions for you and will provide the information that you need. And today, we celebrate a very special day, the Day of Older Persons in Alberta and National Seniors Day in Canada. Each year, October 1st is proclaimed as Day of Older Persons in Alberta to formally recognize and acknowledge older Albertans and their contributions to our communities, raise awareness about seniors' interests and concerns, and address misconceptions about older persons and aging. We are honored to celebrate each of you, and with what more fitting way than to help you live your best lives. This morning, we're very pleased to have Dr. Dion Neame and Dr. Neame Stanojcic join us to show you how to empower your life through preventative health, highlighting the impact of exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, and vaccines. We welcome back Dr. Dion Neame, who is country medical lead for Sanofi Canada and country medical head for Pasteur, the vaccine arm of Sanofi. He's also a pediatrician working in the pediatric urgent care clinics in southwestern Ontario and has spoken recently about some of the key developments and new research related to the fight against COVID-19. And we welcome Dr. Neame Stanojcic, who is the Medical Science Liaison, Western Provinces from Sanofi Pasteur Canada, specializing in immunology. Dr. Stanojcic's passion is for the primary prevention of infectious disease through education and empowering Canadians to healthy aging. Welcome, doctors. We look forward to hearing the information you have to share for us today.
Great, wonderful. Well, thanks very much for having myself and Neame. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to represent Sanofi. Sanofi is kind of a cool company because it has products which kind of span the healthcare gamut from prevention to cure and lots of stuff in between. And that's why, we've adopted the term here at Sanofi about empowering life, because as employees, it's our mission as a healthcare partner to support Canadians to empower their lives and to live to their potential. So thanks very much for having myself and Neame today. Neame is actually going to be taking on the role of the vaccines as an immunologist, so that sort of helps out. But because of the whole COVID issue, so he'll focus in on COVID. But I'll be doing more of the other things that we need to do to be healthy as well, which is the exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness side of things. So why don't we get started then? All right, very good. So Neame's running the slides there, and I'm running my slides on another screen just above here. So here we go. Okay, so why does preventative health matter? Well, full disclosure, I just want to tell you that right now that I'm a really, really passionate primary prevention person. So I'm going to you'll have to excuse the exuberance, but in the next 45 minutes, Neame and we're going to get really excited about this, and we're going to try to convert all of you good folks to prevention health addicts. How's that? Next slide there, Neame. So we do have a growing public health concern that's risen in Canada, and it's a large part is due to the high rates of chronic conditions that we have, particularly in older Canadians. So when you talk to the Public Health Agency of Canada, they'll note that 6 out of 7 Canadians, it's almost 85%, over 65, yes, they have one chronic condition compared to people that are between 45 and 64 years of age, which have about, will have 1 out of 2 will have a chronic condition, but still those are high rates. Those percentages are 85% and 65 plus and 84% or 48% in the other group. One of the concerning thoughts when you're talking about people that are 65 years of age and older is that 1/4 of them actually have multiple different chronic conditions, and we call those the multimorbidity people. And they tend to be the players that we know. It's diabetes, it's cardiovascular disease, it's cancer, and it's chronic disease. And this has really caused a lot of strain and pressure on because of the volume on the healthcare system. It's disrupted our access to healthcare. It's disrupted the quality of our healthcare, and healthcare costs have become almost unmanageable by local and provincial and federal government. So staying healthy helps us, helps our friends and family, and it also helps our governments. Next slide, Neame. Great. So you know what, Neame, I think actually, frankly, you're going to be taking over for the next 15 minutes, and we'll be talking about vaccines related to COVID. So I'll give you the wheel, the chair.
Great. Thanks, Dion. And thank you again, Colleen, for the introduction. And of course, a warm welcome to everyone who was able to attend today's webinar. As Dion said, we're both passionate about this topic, and I'm really excited to share some insights. And hopefully you can take away some very interesting aspects from this presentations in terms of not only staying healthy, but also really digging into a little bit to gain a greater perspective of the COVID vaccine as it will be available very, very soon. So I just wanted to start by discussing the importance, of course, as a pillar of healthy living equation. And in addition to the non-medicinal approaches that Dion will be discussing, I wanted to take a moment to discuss vaccines and specifically the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. So as a disclaimer, we do not have a COVID vaccine, as you all know, licensed in Canada yet. So I will be discussing technically what is considered off-label content. However, for the purposes of today's presentation, I will not be discussing individual products. I just want to raise your awareness and to educate you on the vaccine technology itself rather than individual products. So medical professionals used to consider diseases as being one of two arms, and that would be communicable or non-communicable. And with the two of those being completely separate of one another. However, it was only more recently that they started to realize that via the immune system, that these are not actually separate entities. And in fact, they're intimately joined. And how they're joined is through a process known as inflammation, which acts as a bridge, which connects these two different excuse me a moment there. And a classic example of what I was referring to in terms of this bridge of communicable and non-communicable diseases is the interplayer relationship that has been studied extensively, and that is influenza's ability to trigger heart attacks. So when you take an individual that is high risk for plaque formation, when they are infected with influenza, the infection itself is able to trigger the immune system. And as you would imagine, this immune system response produces millions of immune cells that not only combat the foreign flu virus itself, but it also may exacerbate some of the underlying inflammatory processes within the body and specifically around the atherosclerotic plaques. So this leads to the plaques being broken down, which could lead to some potential bleeding and an eventual clot. And if that clot occurs in our coronary arteries of the heart, then you have an obstruction. And that obstruction, of course, to those very important coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart is a heart attack. Now, sometimes we don't always uncover these relationships or associations until we really investigate them with clinical studies. And as I'm sure Dion would agree in his experience working in primary care or in emergency medicine, when a patient comes into the ER with a suspected heart attack, Dion, let me ask you, would most clinicians ask them, hey, by the way, have you had the flu recently?
Absolutely not. You have people that are extremely unwell. They are, well, frankly, they're dying in front of you. And so you have to focus right in on what's going on in front of you. You can't be asking questions like, well, how were you feeling last week? Did you have flu-like symptoms? That's just, there's just no time for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's not something that's top of mind at that moment. So as a result of that, in order to study and really understand these relationships, we as researchers really, and as an organization and healthcare professionals, we rely on real world studies. And they've been fundamental to advancing our understanding of the extended burden of influenza infection. And as shown here, as you can see on this slide, so this study was conducted by Jeff Kwong in Ontario. And what they found was that having influenza infection, you are at 6 times greater risk of having a myocardial infarction or a heart attack within the first 7 days after having influenza infection, relative to the week before and the week after. And in older adults, in fact, individuals who are 65 years of age or older, that risk increased to 7 times. So it's studies like these that are very important that we raise awareness to as they expand our understanding of the relationship between influenza and other non-communicable diseases. Now, with that background, it brings us to present day and the COVID-19 global pandemic. And as we are all on the eve of an annual fall influenza and respiratory virus season, this year, unfortunately, will not be a typical season. This year has the added complexity of the co-circulation of our respiratory viruses that we typically see with COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 virus. And as of today, as you're all aware, we still do not have a vaccine available. So it's important more than ever at this time that everyone receives their flu shots to not only protect themselves, but to protect their loved ones from serious complications. Now, in terms of treatments or vaccines in development, this is where we're at this time. We have over 300 diagnostics that are currently in development, and several of these are becoming available slowly. In terms of therapeutic treatments, they haven't worked out all that well to date. And we have been limited to a number of products that are already licensed for other purposes, and we're trying to repurpose them as a treatment for individuals who have COVID-19. However, they haven't been dramatically effective at this time. And for the most part, they've really only showed improvements in individuals in terms of that had a very high severity of disease. So that would be, for example, if they were ventilated or if they were in the ICU. So at that time, with that in mind, it really puts the focus and all our attention and what you're hearing has been on vaccines and vaccine development to date. So with more than 100 vaccines being developed against SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 by research teams across the globe, all vaccines have a common goal, which is to expose the body to an antigen that won't cause the actual disease itself, but it will provoke an immune response that can block or kill the virus if a person becomes subsequently infected. So there are 4 different categories of COVID-19 vaccines. That is viral or virus, nucleic acid, viral vector, and protein-based. So I will go over these in the next few slides, and hopefully you'll gain a better understanding of really how each vaccine technology or candidate is unique, yet also that there is a common thread among them in terms of the overarching goal, which is to elicit an immune response and to provide subsequent and future protection. So I know this slide looks extremely complicated, but bear with me. I do want to touch on this briefly because I think it's fundamental to understanding COVID-19 candidate vaccine. So our immune system functions with 3 goals in mind. The first, we want to recognize foreign material that enters the body. Secondly, we need to destroy that foreign agent. And third, we need to create a memory of that foreign invader so that we can protect ourselves against future infections. So when looking at top to bottom from this slide, it shows a detailed version of what infection with SARS-CoV-2 virus looks like. So again, as I mentioned, I won't go into too much detail, but just a few key takeaways. The first being that the coronavirus attaches to respiratory cells and enters the cell. It's then broken down its genetic material and it is released by the cellular machinery, and the viruses that are produced are released out of the cell. So once released, it's recognized by the immune cells that ingest that virus and present a portion on the outer wall. And this process, as you would imagine, of presentation is called antigen presentation. And while exposed, it can be recognized by the immune response. It can be recognized and then an immune response is able to begin. And so for the purposes of this presentation, when I say that immune response or immunity response, I want you to remember 3 key takeaways. It's 3 steps. The first, we need T helper cells. T helper cells, as the name implies, are the core cells of our immune system that communicate with other cells, such as B cells, to produce antibodies to 1, combat the virus. 2, we need those T helper cells to also communicate with other cells called cytotoxic T cells, which destroy infected respiratory cells of the virus. And third, after all this combating that's going on, we also need one integral step, which is we need to protect against future infections. So memory T cells and memory cytotoxic T cells, memory B cells and cytotoxic T cells, excuse me, are produced to protect against subsequent infections. So as I go into detail in the following slides about the specific vaccine candidates, I really want you to take away from each is that those 3 integral steps are common to each of them, and that is really what connects them. And there are some delayed animations. We'll let them build out as we move on. There we go. Sorry about that. So when we talk about virus vaccines, these vaccines are use the actual virus itself. However, it is in a weakened or an inactivated form. And an example of this would be your annual flu shot, where a chemical agent or heat can be used to render the virus uninfectious. And this will not cause disease itself. So by receiving a weakened version of the influenza, your immune system is able to mount an immunity response to create protective antibodies and memory. And that memory can be used to protect against subsequent infections and more or less offer protection throughout the influenza season. So now we have nucleic acid vaccines. So these are new and never been licensed before, but they are very unique technology. So what happens is you take the messenger RNA, which is a genetic code of the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. So the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, if you've ever seen the virus, there's some of the schematics in the media, it's really that little spike on the outer edge of the virus itself. And that's really what differentiates it and characterizes it from other viruses. So now what they're doing is they can then place this into a vaccine and administer that and administer it to individuals. However, a caveat to that is if you are giving foreign genetic material, inserting it inside the body, well, our immune systems are extremely sophisticated and they will immediately recognize that that's foreign, you should not be there, and they will destroy it. So this is a potential challenge because we need that foreign material in order to create that immune response. So in order to trick our immune systems to get the RNA inside our cells, the virus is placed in a lipid coat or a nanolipid particle, which really just acts as a messenger, a carrier. And that way, with that carrier, it's able to gain entry inside the cell. Then when inside the cell, that messenger RNA coding for the spike protein is able to use the cellular machinery to create copies of that spike protein released outside the cell. And then from there, we get to go through our 3 common steps, which again is to create that protective antibodies and to create that lasting memory to protect against subsequent infection and exposures. So another type of vaccine becoming popular is the viral vector vaccines, and they come in 2 different types. That is weakened or replicating and non-replicating. So what they do is a component of the genetic material for SARS-CoV-2 spike protein is added to a weakened measles or an adenovirus. And these viral vectors are uniquely engineered to have the same outer shell containing the coronavirus spike protein. Then from there, what they're able to do is to, of course, infect respiratory cells, to replicate without causing disease, but still they're allowing that common thread, which is the immunity response, to occur to give us future protection. So the last type of vaccine candidate I want to discuss is the protein-based vaccines. So these are very traditional vaccines. So instead of giving the whole virus itself, which we've seen, they give a portion of it, which is able to create immunity response. So now there are 2 different types. The protein subunit virus, which for an influenza, as an example, can be produced from egg or mammalian cells. And then these proteins are placed inside a vaccine. And the other approach is to use a vector-like particle, which is essentially a virus with an empty shell, as you can see on the schematic here. So that does not contain any genetic material, so it will not cause disease, but the outer shell contains those unique spike proteins, which the body is able to recognize and the immune system is able to go through its response. So just in summary, just remember that there are 4 categories of COVID-19 vaccines currently being developed: virus, viral vector, nucleic acid, and protein-based. And although that they are different, the goal of these approaches is that common thread. It is one and the same, and that is to create an immunity response that will not cause disease, but will engage our immune system to create the protection it needs to fight off future infections. So I hope I didn't lose anyone. I can see the same amount of participants, which is a good sign. So that sums up my section. I'll pass it back to Dion. Thank you again.
That's great information.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Neile. I know that's a really tough section, and that's why I passed it on to you. No, you did a great job explaining it. I mean, basically, in the next, oh goodness, I think it'll be probably about a year from now, maybe shorter, hopefully shorter. We will be seeing multiple different COVID-19 vaccines that'll have been advanced purchased agreements created through the Canadian government. And so it really just depends on how the vaccine trials go right now. And if they do work, well, then that's where the advanced purchase agreement is going to be very helpful, because we as Canadians will be getting those vaccines fairly smartly after those trials are completed. If they don't work, well, then we've got multiple different types, as Milei's gone through. Out of the 4 types, the Canadian government's looking at 3 different types. So if one doesn't work by chance, we've got another one coming. If 2 don't work, well, we've got another one coming. And so it's been a very good play, as it were, for the Canadian government to do so. We've still got a bit of work to do, though. Okay, so now getting back to maybe some of the other stuff that's less involved in therapeutics or prophylactic medicines. This is more involved in behaviors, So let's talk about exercise, nutrition, and mental health. And just popping to the next slide. Thank you, Miele. So just the art of exercise. So a few caveats to talk about here. And I think that's what's really important right off the bat is when you exercise, both your body and your mind are actually going to benefit. And that's because we actually have hormones in place. So let me explain that a little bit better to you. So this is a relatively new concept since around the 1980s. And it actually came out of a study which was not intended to actually talk about exercise. And it was actually intended to look at medication called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And these are medications that are used for people who have depression. And so what they did was they set up a study in which they had 2 groups, which were virtually identical, and we call that randomizing. And in the one group, they got these medicines, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are known as like Prozac and Paxil for trade names. And they compared it to a group of people, and they were on a daily exercise routine. So what they did at the beginning of the study is they did a depression scale, and that's like a survey. They did a depression scale. They saw where people were landing. Then they instituted the treatments over a 6 months period. Either one hand, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. On the other hand, it was the exercise program. Okay, so what happened? Well, at the end of the 6 months, they found that both groups had improved, and that's wonderful. The interesting part about it is that the exercise group had improved as much as the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor group, and as much as the medicine group. And so exercise, you can see then, affects the body and the mind. Now, why would that happen? Well, this is because, as I mentioned on the slide, because hormones are at play. So when you start to exercise, you in fact generate hormonal fluctuations. So when you start an exercise, the first thing that would happen you would get an increased level of adrenaline, increased level of cortisol, and that's to perform the exercise. Now, to continue on with the exercise, you have other hormones that come up, endorphins and serotonin. And then in the third kind of phase of the hormones are growth hormones and testosterone, and that's to recover from it. But the key thing here is that hormones have a systemic or a full body action. And so that's where you get your interplay between the body and the mind. And that's how, when you exercise, not only do you affect the body in a positive way, but these hormones affect the mind in a positive way. The specific ones you might want to talk about are the serotonin and the what we call the endogenous endorphins, or the body's natural morphine. Okay, and then just kind of moving along a little bit, the next thing is health benefits now and later. So health benefits now, well, that's more of a premier athlete type of thing, or a weekend warrior athlete. So the fundamental principle in that is that you're trying to improve your athletic prowess, and that's fine. That's really good. But for decades, though, we've realized that if you exercise on a regular basis, you reduce everything from cancer to diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, dementia, It's just, a tremendous magnitude or tremendous spectrum of diseases are reduced simply by exercising. One of the things I always talk to people about before I get really excited and say, you got to go out and exercise, is the damage and recovery principle. So when you're exercising, you're actually damaging your cells somewhat. And that's because, or damaging your body somewhat, that's because in the recovery phase, your healthy tissue actually recovers better, right? So if you're maybe exercising with your muscles will break down a little bit, but when they recover, they recover in maybe a more functional or even a larger size if you're doing heavy weightlifting or something like that. So it sounds a little bit crazy, but when you exercise, you damage and then you recover. So, but you do have to be careful of that balance. So you don't want to do, kind of do the New Year's resolution thing and you go to the gym, I'm gonna run, and you run and you run and you run for 25 minutes and then the next day you can't move. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. So you have to balance in your exercise for your level of fitness. And that's a lot to do with preparing for exercise, an exercise plan, proper equipment, wearing the right shoes, the right, appropriate intensity. You don't want to be exercising too hard, and the duration and the frequency. And so those types of things. So just a quick caveat. All right, so now let's talk about on the next slide, the different forms of exercise. So essentially when we talk about exercise, we talk about 3 different types of exercise. And the first one, very commonly, it's the cardiovascular exercise. Now, what's really important about the cardiovascular exercise is that it's defined as any type of exercise that increases your heart rate. So that could be going to the gym, sure. Or it could be sports, yeah, those make sense. But it can also be gardening, or it can be walking the dog. It can be normal daily activities. The thing about it is that we try to do it on a fairly regular basis. So it would be probably a good idea if you're doing cardiovascular exercise to do it about 4 to 5 times per week. If you can do maybe 30 to 45 minutes. And usually for people that, are kind of in our age group, 55 plusers, we tend to do moderate exercise. So what does moderate exercise mean? Well, moderate exercise tends to be an exercise like if you're walking at a pace where you would get a little bit short of breath. Like, so if you're talking to someone while you were walking, that, you might find that you have to kind of take a little bit of break between the words that you're saying, because you might have to take a bit quicker of a breath. And also that your heart rate might go up a little bit more, and you might even start to sweat a bit. So if you want to be, that's the kind of the qualitative approach. But if you want to quantify it, if you want to quantify it, particularly with the heart rate, you actually have a formula that's in play that can help us with that. And so for a moderate exercise, we usually take 220 as a number and minus our age. So let's say we're 220 being the number, our age being 60. So we're about 160 for the formula number. And we want to exercise so our heart rate is about 50 to 75% of that 160. So it's about 80 to 115 beats per minute. So if you happen to have an Apple Watch on, or you happen to have a Fitbit or something, and you're walking away, you can have a quick look down and say, oh yeah, I'm about 90 beats per minute, or about 100 beats per minute. That's a good exercise. If you're a little bit lower than 80, you might want to walk a little bit faster. If you're a little higher than 115, you may want to just walk a little slower. And if you're walking and you're on different terrain, what you'll notice is that when you're on flat, your heart rate will be down a little bit. If you start going up a hill, you'll start to notice that your heart rate will start to go up because there's more work being needed. So yeah, so that's cardiovascular exercise. Now the next, on going from left to right, you have resistance training. And resistance training, also known as weightlifting, but I think resistance training is a little bit better of a term personally. And so what we're doing here is we're not just working on our muscles. We're working on everything that's sort of attached to muscles. So you've got your tendons, you've got your ligaments, you've got your bones. So what we're doing here is when we're resistance training is we're actually developing strength around some key elements of our body, which tends to be our joints actually. And so this provides us kind of a fitness level where, if you're at the mall and that unexpected 10-year-old comes blasting out of a store, that you've got an ability to move and you can balance yourself. That prevents falls. And so that's where it's really important. On the right is flexibility. So flexibility is extremely important. I think a little bit more important than people realize. Let me just give you an example of this. So if you're talking about an elastic band, right? And so with your elastic band, if you stretch it out a little bit and you shoot it, well, it'll go, oop, but if you really get it going, you really stretch it, it could shoot for for meters. So the muscles are very similar to that because they actually work on these cross filaments called actin and myosin. I don't know why I just told you that, but hey, actin and myosin. Throw that out there sometime and see if you can start a conversation. But actin and myosin filaments, they just kind of cross-link on top of each other. So they cross-link and they move. So muscles actually, when they contract, they actually cross-link on those actin and myosin filaments. Okay, and so if you have a very flexible muscle, you can cross-link more, as opposed to if you don't have a very flexible muscle. So you can see that a flexible muscle has an ability to have greater strength. I mean, it's very common in golfers. I mean, you'll see, some people that are golf. I mean, I see, for example, women golfers on the LPGA. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, you're talking about people that are 130, 140 pounds. They can hit a ball 300 yards. and a lot of that just has to do with this tremendous flexibility that they have. And obviously the club's also very flexible. So those two levels of flexibility, the club and the body, allow, a tremendous drive of 300 yards. And that really comes down to the fact that we're not saying that they're stronger than, say, anyone else. What we're saying is that they're more flexible, and technique helps as well, but they're more flexible and they have much more stretchability of their muscles. Okay, so those are your three levels. Okay, so next slide. Thanks, Neame. I think a very important principle here is that exercise alone won't make you thin. So while physical activity is crucial for good health, it doesn't, kind of, as I've got on the slide, doesn't melt pounds. In fact, it can add them. I mean, so once again, back to the New Year's Eve resolution. Some people, they go to the gym and they're working out like crazy, doing all this cardiovascular, this resistance training, this flexibility, but two things are going to happen there. There's going to be a physiological response and there's going to be a psychological response. The physiological response to exercise actually makes you hungry. So if you're thinking about losing weight, you're doing an exercise that might make you hungry. The psychological part about that is that, well, you were just in the gym for half an hour. You deserve to eat. So you've earned it. So sometimes people tend to eat more, and they actually, so they feel hungrier. They feel the need that, and I've earned it. So they actually end up eating more calories than they've actually burned. And if you go to the next slide, it's sort of a funny slide here. You've got the blueberry muffin in between, and it's about 360 calories. So how does a normal, like a 30-year-old, 154-pound woman, how much exercise will she need to burn off those 360 calories from that blueberry muffin? Well, if we go up to like, if it's a clock, if you go up to 1 o'clock and you can see the cycling, well, she'd have to cycle at an easy pace for 77 minutes. You'd have to vacuum for 92 minutes. You'd have to jog at a moderate pace for about 33 minutes, weightlift for 115 minutes, do laundry for 230 minutes, garden for 66 minutes, inline roller skate, which is sort of, at a moderate pace, and that'd be for 21 minutes, or mow the lawn for 66 minutes. Kind of makes you not really want to maybe dig into too many muffins because they're high caloric intake, and it just gives you an idea. It takes a lot to kind of work those off. Now, that being said, though, that your body is always burning calories just to live. You're burning calories, but if you go to exercise, you'll generate a higher burn of those calories. So what I'm getting at is that, it's not just about exercise, it's about exercise and nutrition. Thanks for moving the slide, Neame. So the art of eating now. Now there's so much to say about eating. I could go on forever and ever and ever, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to stick to some of the topics that seem to keep coming up. So lots and lots and lots and lots of information about eating, dieting. And so it's almost to a point of confusion. So what's been going on out there recently? Well, people are talking about two kind of things. They're talking about fasting or modified fasting, talking about the ketogenic diet, talking about glycemic index. Let's kind of try to simplify that whole thing. So what's really happening is when you're eating, the physiology behind all these kinds of eating patterns are utilization of the calories that you're taking in and storage of those. And then it's kind of another process called, what are you storing? Are you storing glycogen or carbohydrates, which break down to glycogen, break down to kind of sugars, glucose, or are you storing fat, right? And how can you utilize those? So When you look at it from a perspective of fasting, okay, so if you're eating a normal diet, what's the first thing that happens, or what's the first store that you fill up? Well, you tend to fill up your glycogen store. So your carbohydrates tend to fill up your liver with sugar. You tend to fill up your muscles with sugar, and those are utilized right away. Now, if you happen to be starving for some reason, and the natural way that we starve every day is that we go to sleep. So when we're sleeping, we're utilizing what's in the liver and utilizing the muscle until we exhaust that. And then what happens? Well, then we actually have to use another energy source, because we always need energy. Our brain needs energy at all times. And that's actually our fat tissue, our adipose tissue. And that's what burns, that's what supplies the energy next time. So we're burning our fat by breaking it down. You have to be a little bit careful of that, because you're actually breaking down fat, but you're actually producing these things called ketones, which isn't the best state to be in, but it's okay. It's okay to do that. It's just that, our body kind of likes to do both the carbohydrate and the breakdown of fat. So then we just jump into this whole Atkins diet, or this ketogenic diet. Now, this is a fairly abnormal diet. Now, so what they're saying is, you're not allowed to eat any carbohydrates. So you're not allowed to break down carbohydrates into glycogen to fill your liver and to fill your muscles with basically glucose or sugar. No, all you do is eat fat, which basically means that your body is always going after the energy source of your fat or your adipose tissue. So you're burning fat. Your fat's like on fire. And okay, it works. It really works, actually. You can see people lose 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 pounds in a month. And if that's your goal, that's great. The only thing is that diet healthy? Well, not really, because you're not getting the micronutrients you need. There's no fruits, there's no vegetables. Well, you can have vegetables, but they can't be vegetables that are grow below the ground. So there's no potatoes, there's no beets. So you're very selective in your vegetables, but there's no carbohydrates, right? Many of the carbohydrates can be like things that are fortified. So you have breads that are fortified with vitamins. Obviously, fruits are power packed with vitamins, but they also have antioxidants in it, which are cancer fighting. So if you're thinking about fasting, okay, well, that you can do that. I mean, some people do what we call intermittent fasting. And so what they do is they will stop eating at 8 p.m. at night, and then they'll go to sleep. And then maybe instead of having breakfast right away, they might have a coffee with a little bit of cream in it. And then they won't eat a full meal until about lunch. And what you're doing there is, after about 8 hours, you've exhausted your carbohydrate stores, then you're going to be burning your fat stores until about noon, where you're going to then eat a well-balanced meal. And that's perfectly fine, because eventually you're going to get a well-balanced meal, but you're still going to get that added value of, because you're fasting for a long period of time, of actually breaking down fat stores. The next thing, actually, maybe in the next slide, I'll talk to you about there. Thanks, Neame. Let's pop into the next. There we are. The next thing, though, we'll talk about is a very different concept. So just park over the fasting idea, and let's just talk about foods and the types of foods that we can eat. Well, there's a term that you may have heard before. It's called the glycemic index. Now, what is the glycemic index? Well, the glycemic index is about the food that you eat and what it does to your blood sugar in a 2-hour period. So the glycemic index is from 0 to 100. And when you talk about 100, you're talking about pure sugar. You're talking about white sugar. And what happens when you take white sugar is that it, in 2 hours, raises your blood sugar as high as it can for any other food. So it becomes 100. Now, then you talk about other different foods. Say, for example, they're not sugar, they're not fine sugar. Let's say they're thinking things like nuts. Well, nuts takes a lot of energy, in fact, to break down, and they're not really full of sugar. So basically, the glycemic index of, say, nuts might be like 30. So if you took a cup of sugar and you took a cup of nuts, basically what's going to happen is that the energy level that you're going to get is going to be much higher in that pure white sugar. It's going to ramp up really, really high, and it's not going to take any real energy to do that at all. Whereas if you take a cup of those nuts, in order to break down those nuts, it's going to take energy. And what you're going to find is that your blood sugar is going to be much less than that cup of sugar. So you're actually gaining less energy, although you ate the same amount of food. And so essentially what you're doing is you're putting in less calories. I mean, I don't think I've ever spoken to a person that's had a purely sugar diet, but the amount of calories that would be driven in there. But it's not just sugar. Like we're talking about chocolates, or we're talking about those 2-bite brownies that I love. But those are going to drive up your sugar levels, give you lots and lots of energy. With the same sort of volume as, say, a nut. So depending on the type of food that you're eating, that's going to dictate the amount of calories that you're putting in. So when people tend to talk about this Mediterranean diet, what they're really talking about is they're talking about the glycemic index, and they're talking about foods that are sitting on the lower end of the glycemic index. So when you look at the nuts or fruits and vegetables or beans or fish or something like that, these will not have the level of sugar content. They will not have the explosive energy that you're going to get if you're eating white sugar. So you're eating maybe the same amount or less, and you're actually, but you're getting far less calories. You see, this is the whole point. You're getting far less calories. The other thing about these types of foods, when you're talking about the Mediterranean diet, and I sort of mentioned this, is that they have a lot of antioxidants in them. So what you can see up there in the upper middle side, those are spices. Spices have a lot of antioxidants. It's very cancer controlling. You can see the fruits and vegetables, again, cancer controlling. Even the beans and legumes, they are cancer controlling. Olive oil basically is full of antioxidants. And so the diet that you're dealing with here, you can eat as much sort of as you like within reason, but you certainly are not going to get the high caloric content that you would if you ate the same balanced amount of like pure white sugar, because of that glycemic index, right? Now you see there in the bottom corner there, they've got that nice glass of wine. Well, what we've discovered in the Mediterranean diet is that you have to basically do all the other boxes so that you can drink the wine. So everybody thought for a little while, they was like, yeah, I'd have a glass of wine or 2 glasses or 3 glasses of wines a day. It's much better for you. Well, okay, maybe not so much now. The studies have been showing that, it's okay to have a glass of wine maybe, every other day, but it certainly isn't something that you want to get too excessive. And there actually has been correlations between higher alcohol content and certain types of cancer. So just a little caveat there. Okay, next slide then, Neame. So this is sort of my favorite topic is mindfulness. So mindfulness it's a psychological process of bringing one's attention to the now, to the experiences that are occurring in the present moment, right? And it's a tremendous asset to our mind when we're thinking about Mediterranean diet, to meditation. So when you're meditating, so you're staying within the moment. So let me just give you a quick example. So every morning I've got a bit of a bad back. So I get up, I get into the hot tub. So I open up the hot tub, get into the hot tub. And what do? Well, I don't pick up my cell phone. I actually look up, and I look up at the trees, and I watch the leaves, and I watch them as the wind sways them back and forth. And occasionally I see the odd bird flying through. Maybe I'll see a squirrel buzzing up, running around. But you see what I'm doing there, right? So I'm present in the moment. I'm in the hot tub, good place to be. And I'm looking up, and I'm taking note of what's happening right now, which is nature, which is just, moving leaves and that. I'm not thinking about the bills I have to pay. I'm not thinking about scary things that might have happened in the past. I'm not thinking about, oh my goodness, Neame and Dion have to do a talk. We're pretty calm about that, actually. But I'm not thinking about things that are going through in the future that might stress me out, okay? And so this is mindfulness. Why do I worry about that? Next slide, Neame. Why do I worry about that? Because we are hardwired for stress. Stress is a very important part of survival. Let's give you 3 examples. Let's say, for example, you happen to be walking in Africa, and you see a tiger. You're at one of those Kruger National Parks or something, and you see a tiger. You are going to get a stress response. Your adrenaline is going to go through the roof. And you are going to have an ability to run faster than you've ever run before. Run back to the bus. Get on the bus. Shut the bus door. There's a tiger out there. So good news story. We've got a sympathetic nervous system, which has stimulated by adrenaline through our adrenal glands, which allows us to run really fast in danger situations. Okay, let's think about the second case scenario. So now we're sitting, I was gonna say we were at a movie theater, but because of COVID, now we're sitting in front of our TV watching Netflix, and we're watching a scary movie. Okay, so we know we're in our couch, we know it's our TV, and we know we're watching Netflix and a scary movie. Yet when we're watching the scary movie, we get scared. We start to get agitated, and and that's our sympathetic nervous system again. That's our natural system. It's our adrenaline from the adrenal glands stimulating it up. But it's sort of artificial, but it still works in that manner. Now let's take the third case scenario. What happens if you have a thought, and it's a thought that really bothers you? And it's a thought that really bothers you so much you keep thinking about it. I don't know what the thought might be, but I keep thinking about that thought. Well, that thought, because it generates anxiety, it's stimulating your adrenal glands to produce adrenaline, to produce your sympathetic nervous system, to give you all those types of symptoms. Those symptoms that those, not symptoms, but as attributes at this point in time. When a tiger comes and you have to run away from the tiger, except there's no tiger, there's just those thoughts. If you continue to think about those thoughts, and you continue to be in that state, that hyper alert state of the sympathetic nervous system, that can actually be quite detrimental to your body. It tends to come out as anxiety. And then if too much anxiety, then it comes out as depression. And those are really concerning factors. And that's one of the reasons that we have to be able to kind of, like I say, get into a calm place, meditation, stay in the moment, focus in the moment, be cognizant and be aware if you're getting these scary thoughts that are coming into your head that are causing you to get too stimulated. Meditation, mindfulness, stay in the moment, and stay calm. And that is what's real. What's not real is those thoughts that are coming in your mind, right? That are scaring you. And that's a really, really, really big part of the what we call cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's a treatment for anxiety, stress, and depression, right? So just keeping that sympathetic nervous system at a minimum, and don't start it up. Don't bring it to the forefront. Let's just see a tiger, of course. Okay, very good. Okay, so next slide, Neame. So that really comes down to the end of the presentation. I mean, just in a nutshell, Neame talked about it very eloquently, but what we're doing with our vaccines is we're just borrowing the natural immune system. And we're just saying to the natural immune system, here's something that you should recognize, and you should create an immune system response, antibodies particularly. And so on the subsequent infection, or in a real, or what we call a wild type virus infection, that our immune system will recognize it right away because we stimulated it, right, through the vaccine. It'll recognize, oh, I see, we'll kill it right away. Whether it be influenza, whether it be a pneumococcal or a pneumonia vaccine, or whether it be a pertussis vaccine, or whether it be like a zoster vaccine, it's the same basic premise. We're providing what we call an antigen to your body to stimulate your immune system to develop a memory response. So when the real wild type infectious disease comes along, it will kill it immediately and we will not get any symptoms. Exercise, just keeping in mind that exercise is for your body and for your mind. And there's multiple types. There's cardiovascular, there's resistance, and there's flexibility. Keeping in mind the diet. The diets are just eat well, do your best. Remember the glycemic index. Remember those good foods. Foods essentially that are good are the ones that look like they do in nature when you're eating them. So fruits and vegetables. It's okay to have breads, but try to stay to the brown breads. Milk products, sure. I mean, they're perfectly fine. There's lots of different options for milk products. That's great. And then, of course, meats. You want to stay a bit away from red meats. Most people are now shifting towards a fish-based, or more of a fish-based diet than a red meat diet. And then, of course, mindfulness. Remember, you're hardwired for stress. You're hardwired for stress. So you have to work against it and understand the triggers and try to stay away from the triggers. Very good. And I think the next, it's the thank you slide. So this is good news though. So we can answer questions. Neame and I are very happy to answer any questions if you have any. So there you go. Thank you very much for having us.
Great information. Thank you very much. And yes, we welcome you if you would like Q&A. If you've got some questions that you would like to ask of Dr. Neame or Stanojcic, by all means, you can put them into the Q&A. In the meantime, while we're waiting to see what people might want to ask, one of the things, and I think that that's great information, and the prospect of the stress, I think that we're all quite well aware that over this last 7-8 months, people have been living under quite a bit of stress and anxiety because they just didn't know what to expect with COVID. And, you know, of course, every time you get a sniffle or a cough or whatever might be a common cold or flu, automatically you just think, oh, it must be COVID. So great information there that, and maybe we can touch on that just a little bit, is that the differentiation. So if you're getting some symptoms, you know, to lessen your anxiety, how might you be able to identify more clearly whether or not it's just I say simple cold or flu as opposed to COVID?
Well, you know, maybe I'll take that one because I've been dealing with that in the clinics fairly frequently. Well, first of all, it's very difficult to understand. What I will say is that, you know, because they're upper respiratory tract infections, they tend to have many similar symptoms. Now, just to talk about COVID-19 for a second and talk about their symptoms, because a big change is going to occur with that when you understand how it's actually infecting. So when you have a SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the novel virus, the new virus, which is giving rise to the clinical, which is your COVID-19, what's happening is you are bringing the virus in through the respiratory system. And so it's going to hit respiratory areas. There's actually, as Neame mentioned, there's the S protein, and that S protein attaches to any type of cell which has what we call an ACE2 receptor. And once again, viruses are only infecting you because they want to bore your cellular machinery in order to reproduce. They really aren't trying to cause disease. They're just trying to survive. But when they hit certain areas, they're going to cause certain symptoms. So it's a respiratory virus. So runny nose, sore throat, a cough. How will you know if it's SARS-CoV-2? You won't. But if you start to become short of breath with it, it's time to make your way to get a test. Because SARS-CoV-2 tends to attack into the lungs and be a little bit more significant within the lungs, cause a little bit more damage within the lungs than maybe some of the other viruses. But to distinguish it between the respiratory symptoms, between, like, say, for example, COVID-19 influenza, is very difficult. And on top of that, when you get a respiratory infection, or any infection, basically, your body revs up. And when it's revving up, it tends to give you things like fever, chills, and sweats. You tend to get a bit tired and fatigued. Well, that happens in both COVID and that happens in both influenza, so it's very difficult. The difference, though, is that the SARS-CoV-2 will affect any cell which has an ACE2 receptor, and ACE2 receptors are everywhere. So, for example, when you've heard these weird and wonderfuls, like, for example, the SARS-CoV-2 attacks your nasal cranial nerve for your nasal, and all of a sudden you can't smell. Well, that's because the SARS-CoV-2 virus attacked the what we call the olfactory nerve. But anyway, it's for smell. And then the taste. That's because the SARS-CoV-2 S protein attached to the ACE2 receptor of your vagus or facial nerve, which gives rise to your taste. When you hear about these weird and wonderfuls, like, oh my goodness, someone got a heart attack or something like that, it's because the virus broke out, got into the blood, spread around in the blood, and attacked in the coronary arteries. It attacked, you know, the ACE2 receptor, attached to the ACE2 receptor, and caused dysfunction there, and caused clotting in there, and in the brain it can be stroke. So there's all kinds of different things like that. But really, at the end of the day, how do you distinguish it? Probably a lot shorter answer. You have to get a swab. You have to get swabbed. That's really pretty much the only way you distinguish it. But the general rule is, if you're struggling to breathe, please seek medical attention. And it doesn't really matter at that point, whatever it is, they're going to help your breathing issues, and then they'll swab you and try to figure out where it is from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good advice. You know, I think I've been hearing as well, some people are feeling that, you know, the precautions that we've been taking against COVID are going to help to lessen the risk of influenza, colds, and things like that. But I think what we're hearing today is there's still a critical need to make sure that you get your influenza shots. And I think that, are you recommending that we start that now, that we look at getting our shots?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, we're getting there in Canada. So if you can imagine that the virus, the influenza virus, actually goes from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, then back down to the southern, and this is how it circulates around the world. So influenza is in fact a pandemic, and it circulates every year. But the reason that the U.S., for example, will get, they will more quickly get the influenza vaccines because they're more south. So the influenza is coming up first. So we get our second. And so I know that the influenza vaccines, because Neame and I work for Sanofi Pasteur, we know that they've been distributed to Health Canada and the provinces. Now it's up to the provinces now to distribute them. And I would say within, like, I was in the clinic last week, they weren't there, but we were going to order them for this week. And so, in the province of Alberta, I'm suspecting it's going to be fairly soon that you're going to see your influenza vaccines in the doctor's office, I believe in your pharmacies as well. So it's very soon. If it's not now, it's going to be within the week. And I think it's an important time to get it now. I would probably get it sooner than later. Two reasons for that. One of which is basically that they may run a little bit short this year. I don't think that's going to happen. The government was very good about ordering 1.5 million more doses. So I think you'll be okay, but you might just want to work your way to the pharmacy or to your family doc to get one. And then the second reason is it does take 2 weeks for the vaccine to work. And we don't know when influenza is going to start. Just to your point though about, things that you can do, about whether it be for, whether you're doing like you're wearing a mask or you're, making sure you're washing your hands or you're, socially distancing from people, staying those, what do they call it, the 2 hockey sticks apart, 6 feet apart. That's really, really important. And that's for every virus that you do, whether it be influenza or COVID. Those are really important measures to continue, not just getting vaccinated, but continue to do those types of measures. That's for COVID, that's for pertussis, that's for influenza, that's for pneumococcal, it's for everything. Yeah, just abide by what we call the measures, the respiratory infection measures to prevent infection.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be touching base on all of these topics as we go through the month as well. Here we've got some questions coming in, but I believe that Alberta Health Services kicks off their immunization season the 19th of October. So we'll be chatting more about that and immunization against the pertussis and tetanus and all of those other things that that we're going to need. Got a couple of questions coming in here. I'm just going to, Karen Kennedy would like to know, why do you recommend only 2 or 3 times a week for flexibility exercise?
Oh, yeah, good point. That was on my slide. You're very welcome to do flexibility every day. Just remember the intensity. So if you're going to do it every day, you're certainly welcome to do that. I think if you were going to go to a fairly significant yoga class, I think that would then be 2 to 3 times a week. But you can stretch every day, 100%. Sorry about that. I should have probably meant that. You can stretch every day, just not too intense exercise. If you're going to do intense stretching, if you're going to do intense stretching like yoga, then like an hour and a half yoga class, you probably do it 2 or 3 times a week.
And she also asks why you should wait 48 hours between resistant exercise.
It's muscular damage. You tend to, if you're doing light weights, even, you do tend to damage your muscles, and your muscles get sore fairly quickly. So you just want to allow them to recover before you jump in again. So here's the other example. So there's a lot of athletes that really train hard, and they actually end up overtraining, and they actually end up injuring because they're overtraining their muscles. I mean, I did sports at university, and the coaches didn't care. So you exercised, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. It was just too much. It was too much on the body. So you have to give your body just time to recover. Sleep is incredibly important in the recovery process as well too. So if you are in a good exercise program, you're trying to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night.
Okay, and there's a couple coming in here at chat as well. From Irene, certainly appreciating the updates with vaccines and staying well. What an awesome, well-presented, informative session. Thank you to Dr. Dion and Dr. Neame. So obviously people are appreciating the information that you're provided for us today. Another question here. From Jenny, great presentation. Any possibility to receive a link for review again later? As I see, it was recorded. Yes, absolutely, Jenny. We will follow up. Typically what I will do is follow up with everyone after the fact and let them know when that video is edited and up on our Kerby Center YouTube, along with the other presentations that we've been having since all this started last June, I guess. We started these health and wellness presentations, and we'll be continuing on through the duration. As I mentioned, for the month of October. If Dr. Stanojcic, if you don't mind releasing your screen share, I'm just going to put a little something up here as well. Oops, we got one more question here. Oh, perfect, and thank you, Kerby, for the presentations. And so I'm going to also put up a little screen share here because number one, I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware that Kerby Center is open for business. Okay, there we go. The Kerby Center is open. Oh, darn it. It's going to change automatically here for some reason, I think. But Kerby Center is open for business now. We had been closed, and it was what precipitated these presentations, was to be able to stay in touch with our members and our senior community, and to be able to provide them with critical information and resources. Also making sure that everybody is aware that Kerby is a mask distribution center, so that if you need masks, you can get them for free. Just drop into Kerby Center now, or you can call 403-705-3175 to arrange to have some masks delivered. And again, if you require any of our critical services, we're happy to help you out there. Also, thank you to both Dr. Neame and Dr. Stanojcic. Great information. And as I mentioned, we will throughout the month of October be providing further information and just kind of reinforcing the importance and following through on Dr. Neame's good information about nutrition. Our next presentation, October 6th, will be with Megan Barefoot, a nutritionist, and she'll be telling you a little bit more, going a little more in depth into the how you can eat to help your immunity, as well as then again the mindfulness. Padma Ganesh will be joining us to discuss maintaining mental well-being in isolation. Whether it's COVID imposed or whether it's just because of winter being isolated, helping our seniors be able to cope with that. And then looking forward again to recapping everything here regarding infectious disease and immunization on October 19th. As well as then the lung health and respiratory infections that we've discussed, excuse me, on October 30th to wrap up the month. So that we hope that you'll join us for all of those discussions as well. And beyond that, we will be getting presentations into November, wills and estate planning. And so once again, and if we have no further questions, and again, if you do have anything that you would like to ask after the fact, by all means, reach out to me. I'll be happy to forward that on to the doctors. And again, we will be following up to make sure that you have this information to recap. Thank you so much to Sanofi Pasteur as well for their support this month with all of this valuable information for our senior community. And I just also wanted to make you aware that these online sessions are free of charge, and donations are appreciated to Kerby Center at thekerbycenter.com/donate. And I'm going to stop share because I had someone raise a hand here, and I'll see if I can and Irene, please continue with the Zoom since center is open. Such a bonus to hear this information at home. So, and if we don't have any further questions, Dr. Neame and Dr. Stanojcic, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you again today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Anytime.
Thanks so much, Colleen, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you everyone for joining, and I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you.